welcome you all to the meeting with Ronan Hervouet, with my charming French accent in English. That is a must in a French center abroad, a center of social sciences. My name is Nicolas Maslowski. I'm directing this center called Center for French Civilization. It's a strange name. It's sometimes translated as well as a Center for French Cultural Studies. It's actually a center for social sciences and humanities created in 1958 by Michel Foucault, that became very famous since that time. And we have various activities, and we have axes of research in different directions. And actually, those axes are meeting the work of Mr. Hervouet. That's why I'm particularly happy that you are here. Another reason is that we are very involved since 1 year in the Belarusian questions. So some of us since longer, but the center institutionally since 1 year. And that's why I'm very happy of this meeting. But I have to say as well that there are two more reasons why I'm very happy of having you all. I will welcome you all, but I will let Jacek present you more precisely. I'm too very happy. The main reason of our meeting is a meeting with Professor Ronan Hervouet, and you are working on the ethnography, political ethnography. And maybe I'm naive, I'm very different, maybe I had a different education, but it seems to me that it's close to my heart for different reasons. This is the first reason. It's very personal, but I grew up with Ballandier and political anthropology. I know ethnology, anthropology is not totally the same, but for Ballandier, maybe it's a little bit the same. And with Garfinkel as well, that maybe is less your approach, but it's compatible, let's say. The second reason is that you, French professor, you are now a guest lecturer, if it's the right term, in CCFEF, our very friendly center, very friendly partner, based in Prague. It's a French center of social sciences. We had to underline it. We were not underlining it, probably by mistake on the placard, but I will say it orally. We are collaborating very often, and the director of the center used to work here in Warsaw in our center, and I used to work in the other center. So we have this very cross, so this destiny, and this is the personal moment. Thank you for being here, for coming. I would enjoy even that there would be no COVID, and we could organize a large meeting live with our colleagues working with ethnology, with political sciences, with Belarus, so many directions that are passionating many people that I know here in not only in Poland, but I would not only in Warsaw, but I would say in the whole Poland. But this is something we cannot control. Thanks to the technique, and here I would like to thank Jacek that has a camera, and Alicia that is dealing with the computer, and the whole team of the center, we are able to have this hybrid form of meeting. Let me as well salutate Anais Marin. I can see you, Anais. Hello.
Hello, bonjour.
Bonjour. Anais is a fellow from our center that will be presented by Jacek as well in 1 second. And I would like as well to present, I've lost my Professor Buchowski. You arrived, I believe, directly from Poznan.
Yes.
So thank you. It's not as far as Prague or Bordeaux, but it is not in Warsaw. It's a little bit far. Thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited with this perspective of our debates today. And now, Jacek, thank you, because you were one of the motor of this meeting. And that's why as well I asked you if you could say a few words about the people that will speak today.
Thank you very much for this words opening this seminar. So I'm honored to introduce three great researchers who will participate in today's event. They are Mr. Ronan Hervouet, who is a professor of sociology at the University of Bordeaux and a member of the Center Émile Durkheim. During the current academic year, he is member of CCFEF, French Research Center in Humanities and Social Sciences in Prague. His research focuses on the everyday life of authoritarian regimes. Adopting an ethnographic approach, he has published two surveys on contemporary Belarus. First is Dacha Blues, Existence ordinaire, dictature en Bélarussie. It's dated on 2009, and the book, which was translated into English, which title is A Taste for Oppression, a political ethnography of everyday life in Belarus, and it was published this year. Besides, he has also published the books on history of the sociology with Charles-Henri Coin, and he co-edited the book on today's interpretations of work of Émile Durkheim. Ronan, we cordially welcome you to today's meeting. Second researcher is Mr. Michał Buchowski. He is professor of cultural anthropology. He is a director of Department of Anthropology and Ethnology at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. For many years, he was also director of the Center for Migration Studies at Adam Mickiewicz University, and his research interests are theory and history of anthropology, post-socialism, anthropology of post-socialism in Central Europe, neoliberal post-socialism, class theory and transformation, and social exclusion. He has published many articles and books. I will say about few reluctant capitalists, class and culture in a local community in Western Poland, rethinking transformation and anthropology and an anthropological perspective on post-socialism, and rethinking ethnography in Central Europe with Czernikova, Szoks, and Kowalska. Welcome on today's meeting. And last but not least, Mrs. Anais Marin. She is a researcher at the University of Warsaw in the Center of French Culture and Francophone Studies. She is political scientist, specialized in international relations and Russian studies. She holds a PhD from Sciences Po, where she studied international public law and comparative politics with a focus on post-communist transformations in Central and Eastern Europe. As a Belarus expert, she cooperated with several European institutions. She also is a special reporter on the situation of human rights in Belarus, and she has published extensively on Belarusian domestic policies. Welcome also to today's seminar. Thank you.
And now the word is yours, dear professor. Yes.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like just at first to thank the different institutions which made it possible for me to come here, the Faculty of Sociology of Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan, the Centre de Civilisation Française, and thank you, Nicolas, for your welcoming, and the Foundation Florian Znaniecki. And above all, thank you very much to Jacek Kubera. I'm very grateful because you made it possible. We had to scheduled it on last June, and we had to postpone the conferences because of the COVID. And at last, I can be in Warsaw this year. I'm very, very happy to be here tonight and to have discussion about my book with concrete people, just not just online. And thank you very much for thank you very much to Professor Buchowski and Anais Marin for accepting organizing the discussion. I proposed for this conference to sum up in some lines the main arguments of my book, which was published last March in English. Perhaps you could have the slides. It was published in English in March, and it was published last year in the French version in August. And just to begin with, for the context, it was published just 10 days after the beginning of the contest, the unrest in Belarus, but the starting point of my research had no link with these events. So I will try perhaps in the conclusion to make some links between what I observed 10 years ago and what happens today in Belarus, but it has to be very understood that it was not a work thought in a revolutionary context. So just to begin with, I will be quick with the first one. So there's two books. Le Goût des tyrans, the name is inspired by this extract from Alexis de Tocqueville. The love of order is confronted with a taste for oppression. In this Polish context, I think I won't have to be too long about the Belarusian history. Just to be sure, I don't know if there are some students in the public, but the Belarus became independent in 1991, and Lukashenko was elected in 1994 and installed, to be short, an authoritarian regime 2 days after that in 1996. And he defends the Soviet legacy. He defends the Soviet legacy, as we can see in the Belarusian emblems, as we can see with the flag, with the morphology of the capital of Belarus, this statue of Lenin behind the parliament, this banner which commemorates the October Revolution, the center of Minsk, the KGB, the Dzerzhinsky, the statue of Dzerzhinsky is the center of the town, and even a new Dzerzhinsky Museum opened in 2004 on the place where Dzerzhinsky is supposed to be born. And I arrived the first time in Belarus in 1999. 22 years ago, I was interested in everyday life in Belarus. I defended a dissertation in sociology about everyday life through the activity of gardening in the kitchen gardens, in the dachas. So I'm not in the heart of the political life in my approach, but in fact the aim is to understand from a different point of view how politics are understood and how politics are experienced. So on my fieldworks, I'm very far from this type of events which occurred just 500 meters from the place I lived 15 years ago, when the repression was very strong against the opponents after the elections in 2010. But in general, to understand this authoritarian regime in Belarus, but in other contexts also, the approach are, we could say, from above. And in the Belarusian case, we can consider that there are three main arguments, three main ideas. The regime is founded on a vertical power structure. There is a controlled administration and a powerful police system that represses the opponents. And of course, now we see that very strongly, but this repression had different scales during the 20 last years. The second idea is that people obey because they believe to what the regime says. So there is the idea that the propaganda is effective, that the propaganda has a real influence on the minds. The third idea is that the regime can perpetuate because it is founded on a populist social policy. The authorities subsidize very inefficient economic sectors, and in fact they buy the loyalty of the population because they give them some money and some subventions. I'm not opposed to the three ideas. I'm not at all opposed to the three ideas, but I lived 5 years in Belarus, 2 years from 1999 to 2001, and then 3 years from 2009 to 2012. And I shared the everyday life of people in Belarus. I had friends, students, perpetrate, because there is this vertical power structure, because of this political hegemony, and because of this populist social policy. But in fact, I try to understand the politics in Belarus in a different way. I try to understand it from below. And I consider, as in different traditions in social sciences, that people obey also because their life is meaningful. And I try to understand, to analyze this symbolic dimension of legitimacy. There are different traditions. I was influenced by the social history of the communist Europe and the anthropology of socialism. As Alf Lütke in Germany, Sandrine Cotte in France, Sheila Fitzpatrick or Catherine Vedre in the United States, in Great Britain. Political philosophy and political science, as for example, the politics from below, the Jean-François Bayard, different trends in sociology, Max Weber, Michel de Certeau, or Erving Goffman, and what is labeled now in North America as political ethnography, with, for example, the seminal text of Edward Schatz 10 years ago in the University of Chicago Press, who defined political ethnography as revealing, I cite, revealing the meanings people attribute to the world they inhabit. So my key question is this one. How can a system, while imposing severe constraints produce in the same time acceptable forms of life and resulting modes of attachment to the authoritarian regime. I repeat that I formulated this question in a very different context compared to nowadays. It was one of my ideas for my first book about dacha blues, but this political question is more at the heart of the research on the Belarusian countryside. So, in general, even if there are some works as Anais Marin, who worked on Kolkhoz in Poland, but in general, the collectivist system in the countryside is viewed from outside. That there is exceptions, Anais Marin in Poland, or Caroline Humphrey with the book during in the 80s, Karl Marx Collective. But I wanted to understand forms of life viewed from the inside. How did I organize my book? In fact, if to be quick, the countryside is organized as in Soviet times in a collectivist form. There is this principle of market socialism, and there is a very strong control of the countryside from above. Administrative pressure is the expression used in everyday life to understand how the authorities make pressure on people at the local level. There is some public policies. We have to underline that in Belarus, there were still public policies orientated towards the countryside. There were the 5-year plans for the countryside as the revitalization and development of the rural world, and the plan for 2005 to 2010. And organization of what is called agri-towns. So there are some public policies, there are controls, and there is administrative pressure. But my question was very simple, but it was not so easy to gather materials to answer to this question. My question was how people concretely live in this context, and what is the consequence of this everyday life, of this material everyday life, on the way they consider politics. To answer to this question, I had a specific methodology. It is ethnography. In fact, I was inspired by the French ethnography who was developed in the 80s, the French sociological ethnography with sociologists as Florence Weber or Stéphane Beau. And this ethnography was inspired by, on the one hand, the École de Chicago, the School of Chicago, and on the other hand, the first Bourdieu, the first Pierre Bourdieu, who worked in Béarn or in Algeria as an ethnographer and an anthropologist. So I took the tools they used to analyze the working class in France, and I applied them to the Belarusian context. So I made a fieldwork between 2006 and 2013 with exceptions, because during 3 years from 2009 to 2012, I worked for the French embassy, so I was not able to make research. But I lived there, and I had my own life, a personal life with my wife and my children in Belarus. So in everyday life, you live, so you have also informal discussions, and you learn a lot when you're deeply invested in your fieldwork. I have no time, I think, to make more developments about methodology. Perhaps there will be a discussion after that. How did I understand this everyday life? I focused at first on material life. I wanted to know concretely how people live. They have legal resources, their wages, the personal plot of land, the access to some markets, some informal resources which are tolerated, which are not illegal, as the resources through, for example, transnational marriages. In a village, there was a niece who was married to a German, and the car was bought because of this niece. There were cross-border activities, and so on. There are also, I borrowed to Michel Foucault the term illegalisms. There are some resources who are not legal, but who are not systematically repressed. Sometimes they are tolerated, sometimes not. So we can steal some Colco's products, massage the accounts, pilfer the resources. There is the distillation of homemade vodka. And in different regions, you have also the question of poaching. I was very astonished because in different parts of Belarus, there were at everywhere when I went, there were resources. They were different. I have no capacity as an ethnographer to make a systematic cartography of these resources, but there are different resources. For mobilizing these different resources, there's legal and illegal resources, you're inserted in systems of interdependencies. There are horizontal interdependencies within the kinship, within the family, with the neighborhood, and there are also interdependencies with the hierarchy. There are vertical interdependencies. So it's a system of, there is a lot of circulation of people, circulation of goods, circulation of services. So there is forms of cooperation, forms of reciprocities, and the power is not just centered at the top of the hierarchy, but there is a forms of dissemination of little resources. And it is the same thing that observed Catherine Verdery in the Romanian communist context. And then I try to understand how not only concretely how do you live and how do you manage your material life, but how this management of your material life leads you to forms of moral sentiments. How do you evaluate your life? And I consider that there are some values, equality, solidarity, and dignity, which are considered to be possible in this world. I don't say that it is fair or unfair, or it is legitimate or not legitimate opinions. I just try to reorganize the way people represent themselves. So about equality, there is a chapter on the horizons of life. I show how people are not just people who live in the years 2000. They have a biography, and this generational approach we can think from this approach that in general the people consider that their material needs are fulfilled. Even if it's not so simple, but I have to be short. There is also this sense of solidarity, which is felt and defended in everyday life. I organize my thinking around the ritual of the subotniki, which sometimes are viewed only as slavery, as arabsba in Russian. But in fact, the way people told me they lived and practiced these subotnikis was more complex. And there is this feeling that altruism is possible, even if when we act as altruistic person, we also act as people who can reach its own interests. There is a sense of dignity, which is possible in these local stages, in these local scenes. It's important to say that I had no contacts with people who have not good reputation in villages. People who spoke to me had good reputation, so they explain how dignity is possible through work, endurance, ingenuity, enthusiasm, autonomy. And of course, it was not possible for me to speak with people who were more marginalized in the villages. So, in fact, from these values, people consider that it is possible to live fairly. There is forms of fairness in these worlds because if I took the distinctions of François Dubet, a French sociologist, and fairness, according to him, is founded on can be founded on three different perspectives: merits, altruism, and creativity. In fact, there are three different principles of fairness were considered as possible in this context. So I repeat that I don't say that this life and this life is fair. I'm not arguing that the system is fair. I'm arguing that it is possible, according to these people, to consider that the system is fair. And there's different values organized moral communities. The term is a term by Michel Lamont, the Canadian and American sociologist. There were moral communities, and these moral communities feel threatened by external threats. And I defined three moral offenders, people who could destroy the foundations of these moral communities. I reconstructed after my fieldwork these categories. There were not categories used explicitly by the people I met. And I distinguished the profiteers, the idlers, and the moralists. The profiteer is the people, the guy, the woman, but sometimes more often guys who worked only for their own gain, and they didn't work for the others. They were supposed to exploit the others. The second figure is the figure of the idler, the people who don't work enough, who don't want to work, and they, if there is no work, if there is not this work ethic, it's not possible to make the colcos work. So they're accused of threatening the functioning of the system, and these idlers are sometimes very often these people who are qualified as the alcoholics. And this category is not so easy to understand, but I have no time. And the third category is the moralists. the moralist is not the people who subvert the system from within. They critique the system at all, and it's sometimes the urban in general. In more particularly, it's the opponents to the regime, the people who speak of morals who are very strange, very far from the conception of fairness at the local level. The NGOs, the political opponents, the activists. And as these moral communities are threatened, state violence is considered to legitimate to destroy their threats. It's never said as I explained it here. It's from different contexts and discussions that I try to interpret and propose this representation of politics. So for the conclusive remarks, it was in fact I had to react to the events last year with journalists or in different seminars with a fieldwork made 10 years ago. So it's not so easy because the access to the fieldwork is not possible. You understand why. But the hypothesis is that this moral economy was fragilized, is not so strong. The repression now is, even in the countryside, is stronger than before, and the argument of the vertical power structure has more meaning now, I think, than before. But as Max Weber said, the system cannot perpetuate only on violence in the middle term. So probably that's we have as social scientists to try to understand, even in this tragic context, how politics are viewed from above. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. And for your capacity as well to continue to have a very clear vision of your presentation without taking into account these disturbing elements, with the time pressure that is even more difficult to accept when we know how rich is your work, the number of references and so on. And without any more comments, I would like to give the word to Anais. Anais, if you are here, the floor is yours.
I am online. I apologize first for not being able to come to the center today. I just got my third jab this morning and was not feeling very well. But I'll come tomorrow, Ronan, and look forward to listening to you tomorrow morning, maybe having lunch together. So thank you very much for organizing this very interesting and topical seminar. I would like to maybe make a couple of comments. First, I think that I would like to stress that Ronan's research is absolutely exceptional. I mean, in the Belarusian landscape, I am not aware of many other Belarusian or other ethnographers or anthropologists who have really done as such an in-depth study and based on local ethnographic observation, participating observation on a terrain which, as you have highlighted, is getting more and more difficult to access. I myself have been non grata in Belarus for 3 years, so unfortunately it's very hard to continue doing research against this backdrop. Second, I look very much forward to reading the books. I'm a bit frustrated we didn't have it yet, so I would have read it before taking part in the seminar. If you let me just ask one question, maybe you can launch a bit of a discussion also with the audience. You mentioned in your presentation, or it was written at least, the work of Aliena Ledeneva, this Russian sociologist, anthropologist who published a seminal work on the social economy of favors in Russia, using the term which is known to Russian speakers of blat, which not easily translates in English. It's not exactly corruption. It's an economy of favors, which I imagine is extremely present in the Belarusian countryside, as you have described it. And I wanted to ask you, what sense do you make of this this term in your own research? Have you been using it in the same way as Aliana did, or in a different way? And most importantly, as I am sure you're also quite familiar with Russian terrains, to what extent can we say that there is a specific of Belarusian blat, if it exists, and is it specific to the countryside? What have you noticed in particular in terms of exchanging of favors? And I would like to also evoke the case of possible corruption in the countryside, because there is this general understanding that there is no corruption in Belarus, so that it's like happening at the highest level of power in places where it's very hard to actually for us, for example, to identify it and follow, and especially the numbers. But that further down in society, Belarus is very different from Russia, or maybe even from Ukraine or Moldova, for that matter, because there is not this daily little corruptions that we can notice even maybe here in Poland, for example, when you have a little problem with the law or with the authorities, and you manage to get away from it thanks to exchanging some favors. I'm afraid that in Belarus the law is implemented in a way that does not allow anyone to escape it even in case of minor infractions. And I was wondering how, for example, when there is when somebody has a kitchen garden and is, as you mentioned, selling the surplus on the local market, does that fit very well with the legislation on taxation and all the rest? And how are, in that case, when there is a control, how is these kind of situations solved? Does it necessarily mean that the author of the infraction would face liability and eventually, administrative or criminal prosecution, as are many Belarusians nowadays experiencing for also very minor infractions?
Thank you very much, Anais. And I don't know if you want to react now, or maybe we gather the second comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to meet such an excellent author of such an excellent book. I think that, well, many persons could have been invited here in my place because there is well, this is just a proof that sometimes we live in a kind of bubbles, linguistic bubbles, without communicating with each other. And English becomes a lingua franca that helps us to communicate, because there is a long tradition of Polish studies in Polish anthropologists and ethnologist studies in Belarus. Yeah, and I will just mention here a book on people in kolkhoz, or I don't know even how to translate it, kołchoźnicy, by Anna Engelking, which has almost around 800 pages from the Polish Academy of Science. There are also works of Justyna Strachuk on Polish, Belarusian borderland, or Magdalena Zowczak, etc., etc. So I think that they could have sit here and could have made very valuable comments. But I also understand why I'm here. Yeah, because I also work on the local community, on the, maybe not political, but anthropology of work and anthropology of post-socialism. And this is also a good window to comment on your excellent book. And I really find it fascinating. Yeah, the situation is different than it is in all other Central European countries. It's different from Poland, where there was no full collectivization. Only more than 80% of land was in private hands under communism, and at the end of communism. And it's different than in Romania or Bulgaria, where there was reprivatization mostly going on. And Belarus, in that sense, is exceptional. And you rightly have noted it that, well, this is a laboratory of this kind of society. And in a sense, it's a marvel. And the question you have asked is why the system works, where the state farm is this unique system, because in Russia it's also different. Yeah, this unique system operates. And I think that your method, you excuse yourself for your method in front of sociologists, but your method is perfectly ethnographic. It's not Malinowskian that you spent a year and a half in one village. Well, there are many ethnographic methods, and the one you have used is really, provides a lot of material, rich material that produce some excellent or insightful statements about the operation of Belarusian society. It's a laboratory of totalitarian paradigm, and I am using some of your words, of power and domination, of oppression and resistance. But you problematize and undermine all these dichotomies because you are against such dichotomies, and I am on the same page. Let's put it this way. Yeah. So you present something that now I will use some other ethnographies or other statements. How in this system we deal with the power of supposedly powerless, and of course it's Václav Havel, passive resistance, which is worth, weapons of the weak, James Scott, small resistance, also James Scott, or, and last but not least, Eigensinn, Lütke, and of course you refer also to Lütke, a German philosopher, sociologist. And I also like the idea that you want to write against primacy of the ideological. That, well, it's not only this top-down, but also from grassroots to up. That the system operates as a, it's not the pyramid, it's not just a pyramid, vertical pyramid, but there are also many horizontal relations, and you show very nicely the agency of the people, of kolchoznik or kolchozniks, people considered traditionally as being at the bottom of the social structure, and well, very often also they self-perceive it in this way, and this is of course how the system operates. But power is not, in your book, we can see that the power is not maintained thanks to indoctrination only, or thanks to the oppression, but also to the fact that all people participate in it, and these vertical and horizontal relations are interdependent and somehow blend, So there is a certain modus of operandi, and your book really is revealing in this respect, and I've read it. I was fascinated while reading it. There is this, as you write, economy of obligations, economy of reciprocity, but let me not to binding obligations, circulations. They all complement each other, and the analysis, the whole chapter devoted to Subotnik is for me exemplary in this respect. That, well, you show that, on the one hand, it seems that people do participate in this Subotnik because they have to, but on the other hand, they also want to go there because of their not only altruistic but also egoistic reasons. Well, it's a system. I have to go there because then the superiors will see that I was there, so they will repay me this favor. If I won't go, they will somehow punish me and won't allow me to do something, and things like this. It's a really it's a paradigmatic chapter, I would say. The system, but you also showed that that the system functions thanks. So you also showed that system functions thanks to the consent of the people. Yeah, that people. Yeah, Eigensinn. You do something, we don't like it maybe, but you give us something. Yeah, so this is not only this system of reciprocity, but small thefts, which are tolerated. Yeah, illegalism is tolerated, and everybody participates in this kind of legalism. But this system also emanates from the worldview of the people, and this is the worldview of kolchozniks, yeah, which is rooted in historical imaginary, yeah, and well, I will say a bit more about history. That people also see it as a, well, they remember the oppression in Stalinist period, yeah, the collectivization. It was traumatic event. Anna Engelking writes that it was like the end of the world for them. But now they somehow got used to it, and they cannot. It's also, you know, Anna Engelking, in your book, you confirm each other that this is the word that this is the word they want to live it. There is no life without kolkhoz. They cannot imagine the life without a kolkhoz. And I think, I mean, as we know, Lukashenko was a director of a kolkhoz. In that sense, he somehow understands this. Well, I hesitate to use the word mentality because it's now not accepted in anthropology, let's put it this way. But yeah, he understands these people, and those people understand him. And this is that, well, the kolkhoz needs a leader, yeah, a boss, and the state also needs a leader, and the leader has to be decisive, yeah, and support those who collaborate with the system, and punish those who do not want to collaborate. This is why both at the local level and in the probably at the national level, state level, yeah, those who do not work in this system, do not collaborate with the whole community. They do not show collaboration, like alcoholics and others, but also oppositionists. Well, they do not fit into the system. It's like it was. There is something in common with Yurchak's argument that, well, oppositionists in Russia were really perceived by many people in the Soviet society, in the Soviet Union, sorry, were perceived as lunatics that should be really put into into asylum, yeah, because, well, they don't understand the system. Well, but let's go back to this fate that in this world, in their imaginaries, there is a fate, there is a destiny, and I am here, and I should be here. There is a perception of your own status, that this is the order of things, yeah. And then the world, all in all, appears that, well, is divided into us and them. Us, moral beings, yeah, who accept solidarity and dignity, this kind of dignity, and those amoral beings that do not collaborate in this system. All in all, yeah, this is politics. Politics is not about deliberation. Well, there is freedom or there is no freedom. Are we free? We are not free. Yeah, what's a political freedom? But it's an extension of this moral judgment. You are in the community, you work with us, or you are not in the community and you don't work with us. And so, all in all, this is, let's say, my very short abstract of how I read this book and in what ways it is really enlightening. And it's a very good ethnography on the one hand, and also a very good political anthropology. So really appreciate. Yeah, of course, I have several questions. I will just for the beginning. It just crossed my mind. Look again at the title, a taste for oppression. Yeah, if people do not consider it as an oppression, is it a taste of oppression? Why is this oppression? Isn't oppression your term, which is imposed upon these people? They don't see it as an oppression. It is so. It just works like this. This is the world how it is. So why oppression? Yeah, this would be the first question. The second one would be, well, okay, I would. This is perhaps I am influenced by some of these other readings about Belarus. That, well, there are deeper historical roots of this way of this kind of perception of the world, of this imaginary about the world. Yeah, that it's Anna Engelking or Magdalena Zowczak and others here, those who I mentioned, they see it in the practically in feudal system, in the opposition, and how it worked in Belarus, in Western Belarus, etc. So, well, but it is more anthropology than, let's say, ethnology both in very positive sense. But then there would be a comparative question, yeah. In the Polish system, when the communists, or in Eastern Europe, with exception of Belarus, or Central and Eastern Europe, with exception of Belarus, when the system collapsed, the notion of Homo Sovieticus was used to describe people who cannot adapt. Homo Sovieticus, yeah, that, well, these are these losers of transformation, they cannot adapt. Well, actually, literally concept of Zinoviev was made a sociological category for classifying people. Those who can, who are not modern enough, who are not European enough, and cannot adapt to the system, and they were actually described as losers, and who should, well, we have to wait until they die out. And actually, I would say the Polish populism, or the contemporary current government populism, is based on this anti-Homo Sovieticus conception. Well, what they said to so many people in this country, that actually, guys, you are not Homo Sovieticus. You are the soil of this earth. You are the essence of Polishness, and you should be proud of it. Yeah, and this is, and I wonder how, maybe theoretically, this notion of Homo Sovieticus would work in the Belarusian context, yeah, because, well, actually, this is in a sense a continuation of this kolkhoz system, of which they are proud of, both Lukashenko and the people. So this might be an interesting question. And last, okay, and the last point which I want to make is, you do not touch much, or you do not address the issue of some kind of identities, which are in Belarusian context are very much blurred. Yeah, so ethnic and religious, in this case, very often when you are a Catholic, you are Pole, although it doesn't mean that it's not the sense the meaning that we have in mind when we say ethnic and religious. In that context, according to what I have read, yeah, this is blurred in some sense, and also class concept. And the concept of class, yeah, because you write kolkhozniks, but kolkhozniks are also directors of kolkhoz, which is a different, educated, non-educated, etc., etc. So the question would be, does the notion of this, probably this notion of moral belongings, yeah, this moral community of being a kolkhoznik, whether in an elite in a kolkhoz or just an ordinary uneducated person, yeah, that overarch all these differences, class, ethnic, and religious? Okay, thank you very much.
So after this very, very rich reactions, I let you decide in which order you will answer to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments, Anais and Michał, and for your questions. Anais, I used the concept of Blatt. It is a practice. Blatt is a practice, and in the works of Elena Lidinyova, it's also a concept. I observed in the countryside this economy of favors. it's why I distinguish these legal resources and illegalism. And I use the word illegalism and not illegal resources because in the way Michel Foucault speaks about illegalisms, he explained that there are some practices who are not legal, but which are sometimes tolerated, sometimes punished. And it's a way for the authorities to straighten its authority because he can punish whenever he wants. And in fact, in the countryside, nobody respects the legality because it's not possible. It's not because people are not moral. It's because it's not possible to respect the different rules, the juridical, administrative rules. You can borrow some things to the cause, and the chief is okay for that, but you know that when the chief asks you to participate for subotnik, even if you don't want, you say okay because you go to a subotnik, and when you will have to harvest your potatoes, you will be able to use the tractor or the horse of the kolkhoz. So what was very important for me to observe is that from the when you are not in these concrete narratives about everyday life, you don't perceive the scale of these circulations. And there are different little services, and it's not only between neighbors, it is in the with the chief, and the chief has also a chief, and so on. So there are these interdependencies, but it's not corruption. It's not perceived as corruption because corruption is a very big scale, and corruption is in fact punished by the repressed by the authorities. So there is a blurred delimitation between that and corruption, but in fact, if people consider themselves as moral, it is because they consider that these practices are not corruption. Otherwise, they could not consider themselves as honest people. We have to say also that there is no real state capture. The theory of state capture, which was used for in Russia or in Ukraine in some regions, cannot really apply in Belarus because there were also public policy. I insist on that because when you're in these villages, even if there are some poor villages and some richer villages, there are roads, there are infrastructures, and there was this public policy. So when we think of corruption in some models, corruption, state capture, it's not the reality of this countryside. And in fact, if people want to make some commerce of their goods, of the things they cultivated in their plots, it's possible. But if they have problems with the chief or with the chief of the police of the village, it won't be possible. So, and I think that now in this context, because there is a very big repression, it's possible to punish everybody, to find a reason to punish very easy. And the reason is not the economic reason, but when you have a political reason to repress, you find an economic reason. So this system is a system where you can maneuver, but it's also a system where everybody is confronted to what Lidineva and Zinoviev, I think, called suspended punishment. There is a suspended punishment, everybody can be punished. So it's the ambiguity in and I don't remarked any specificity of Belarus. The remarks of the analysis of Lidineva were very helpful to understand what I observed in this local context. Is it clear, Anais? Yes. And yeah, thank you very much for this reading of my book, and I'm very happy because I see that what I wanted to explain was understood. So sometimes you write your text and you are not sure that you communicate as you would like to do, but I understand that you explain what I wanted to say. So thank you very much. Just some remarks before answering to your questions. In fact, I work on the kolkhozes, but not only on kolkhozes, it's villages. So there were people who work for the kolkhoz, but there were some people who work in the school, the agriculture school. There were people who one is carpenter in a village. So they are not only in the kolkhoz. It's this kolkhoz is inserted in a territory where there are some administrative employees, when there are the schools, when there are some workers also. And the world mentality, in fact, I think of the works of Anna Engelking. The problem for me with these words is not the world in itself; it's the way it is understood. Because when you speak of mentality in everyday life, in the conversation in the city, people think of an homogeneous way of thinking and as monolithic way of thinking, as if it was articulated and you cannot change it. So it's interesting with the notion of homo sovieticus. And I tried in the book to understand that there are dynamics. This everyday life is encoded in material practices, and there are representations, but these representations are also ambivalent. They can change. Someone who said to me, Lukashenko is a very good president. The year after, he said that he's the very bad president because he wanted just in this context, because there were a neighbor, to distinguish from the neighbor who was the chief of something in the village. So it's the problem with the idea of opinion. We think that, and as Bourdieu would say, in our scholastic way of thinking, we think that there is an intellectual machine in our brains, and that we think, we organize our ideas, and the politics and our political opinions are just the projection of this thinking. But in fact, it's not the way people I met think about politics. It's not only in Belarus, in the countryside. It's also in a lot of different contexts in France, for example. We had the Gilets jaunes, and it's very not so easy for French sociologists to understand why there was this movement in France. So yes, it's for me the problem of mentality is to forget, to let the people forget that there is this dynamic, even if there is the histoire des mentalités. Just about your questions, yes, about the historical roots and imaginary, I'm aware of my very important ignorance. And when I worked alone, my field works with the help of some friends there, I had the very big difficulty that I had no text, no historical text I could refer to help me, because I have access to English, French, a little bit German and Russian, but it's not so easy for me to read the big books in Russian. So and there is very few social scientists who write in these languages about the long history of this Belarusian countryside. So I think, and I would like to exchange more with Anais, for example, and I think that's it's the justification of more collective programs of research also. And when I was alone on the fieldwork, I hesitated, but I didn't know how to make a more collective approach of my fieldwork. About the title, A Taste for Oppression, yes, it's not the way they think. I agree, and in fact. The first title was Everyday Life Under Dictatorship, but it's difficult to convince a publisher in France to publish a book on Belarus. And Le Goût des Tyrans, it's the French expression of Alexis de Tocqueville. When I proposed The Goût des Tyrans, the publisher was okay because there is something Belarus, tyranny, dictatorship, so on. And I think that it's not. In fact, it is. I try to explain how people from outside think. People from outside think that people in the countryside have the taste for oppression. I don't say that they have the taste for oppression. In fact, I try to explain the idea widespread in the city, in the media, that they have this taste of oppression. So, but in fact, to be honest, it was also
marketing.
Yes, because I had to find some. It was very difficult to find a publisher in France to publish on Belarus because it was 1 year before the events, and even to find a publisher in English, it was not so easy. But I'm not,
for them, oppression was Stalinist period. That's it. This was oppression, and since then it's improving. It's getting better and better. Yeah, this is what
about the identities. It's very interesting. In fact, I stressed on the idea that there is this moral belonging, which delimits the frontier between the us and the them. And in my fieldwork, I had no guides. I just had informal conversation, and I explained people that I wanted to write a book about everyday life in the countryside, and I just wanted them to. I explained that I just wanted them to make a biography, to explain what did their parents, etc. And in fact, their narratives were above all organized around this idea of moral belonging. But it is this limited experience of the fieldwork I had, 40 people. I don't know how many meetings, because I met people different times, many times, sometimes. I think that there is this ethnic and religious aspects, but it was not so important in their narrative. It should have to be more documented. There are differences between the West, between the East. That I had, it was so too fragmented. My material was too fragmented to propose even hypotheses about that. About class, in fact, about class, there was no, I thought at first that there would be a strong opposition with the chief. And sometimes they are criticized because they are profiteers, because they use too much the blood for themselves and not for the good of the people. So sometimes they are criticized, but sometimes and often also they are said to be good chiefs because they have the zabota, the care for the people, because they don't use too much blood for themselves and so on. So I didn't find these distinctions within a hierarchy between the people on the top and people on the bottom, and it was more here this moral belonging. He's honest. He is an honest man, because there were no women as chief of caucuses in my fieldworks. A honest man, a good man, a man who cares for the people. It was very strong. And about the Homo Sovieticus, yes, what I try to make, it is to give a voice to the people we don't hear, we don't listen to at all. And my first experience in Belarus was about the dachas. The dachas, I met people from the city. They had their little gardens, but they were from the city. And these first experiences, when I heard about the people from the countryside, the Rosniki, Mujiki, villagers, there was despised. They were viewed as
underclass.
And yes, underclass, yes. And I read things about the collectivist system in the countryside and so on, but it was very difficult for me to understand how it was possible to live in this context. So I wanted to give the voice to those people, to understand and to give them the voice, and to consider them not as people with an old mentality and they have to, the history is gone and they cannot enter the modernity. I try to show the ambivalences, the ambiguities, and the dynamics of their everyday life and their representations of themselves and of the society and of politics. In fact, last year there were also mobilizations in villages, not in kolkhozes, but in villages or small towns. So there were also forms of dignity who were defended against the regime, but there are also forms of dignity which are defended with the regime against other forms of dignity who are challenging these walls. I hope I was clear enough.
Sure. Thank you very much for all these answers. I believe they were clear, but theoretically our time ended. But practically we were disturbed by some activities. I would propose to our distinguished participants if we can not continue a little bit our conversation. Yes? So there, if I see that everybody agrees, I propose, would you have some questions? I see already one hand that is raised. You can have questions as well from Zoom. If you want to have a question, please write something in the chat. I see that Anna Engelking would like to speak. And so I would give you directly the word after the gentleman.
Yeah.
If you can always introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And not too long question.
Okay, so my name is Alexander Popko. I'm a Belgian journalist and political scientist, and I came actually from the rural area in Belarus, and I clearly recognize these values of this society. You said this equality, solidarity, dignity. So, but if we examine the history, social history of Belarus from in 1994, when Lukashenko came to power, 2/3 of Belarusians were this people living in the cities, so first generation urban people. Mm-hmm. So they're born in the village. From 60 to 1991, about 3 million of people moved from the villages to the cities, so 1/3 of the population, and the same part, probably comparable part, moved earlier. So my question is, those people with a very particular values produced by Stalinist regime in the village. So how much of these values are transferred to the culture of cities, which now represent about 80% of the Belarusian population? So we should be aware that this culture described by you, it's dying out culture, because those people are elderly people. They're about 22% of the population of Belarus now. So the majority of Belarus is now urban population, and the level of urbanization is like in France. But those people, their parents, their grandparents, were from this deeply authoritarian village. So how much this culture of the cities in Belarus resembles this authoritarian culture of villages? Thank you.
So do you want to answer now? Maybe we take a second question. Anna Engelking, the floor is yours. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and for both comments. Thank you, Michał, for showing my book and for relating to it. It was extremely interesting for me from the point of view of my 20-year ethnographic research in the kolkhozes, of course. But what is especially important is realizing that each of us, Ronan Hervouet and me, we used various categories of analysis, but I find out that the outcome of our research is really very much close to each other. And it's very important for me. I have one short point and two short questions. In my research, I made a strong accent on the moral values important for the kolkhozniks. And now, while observing the Belarusian Revolution, I can say I am struck with the importance of the same values in the protesters' discourse. These are, of course, dignity and solidarity, first of all, and placing the human being, not any ideology, in the center of their struggle. This is my short observation about here and now. And two questions. I would like to know a bit more about the sites you researched. If I could ask for throwing it on the map of Belarus, in which rayony, in which obwody have you worked? And second question, could you maybe comment shortly on the gender dimension of your research? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe we could have a first wave of answers.
Okay. Thank you, Anais King. Thank you for your question. And the comment of Anais King is linked to your first question. Are these values transferred to the city? I think that's there's the ideas of equality, dignity. I don't think it's the products of this Stalinist past. In fact, in the theory of justice, we find there's the idea of equality, autonomy, merits, and they also are in the Belarusian countryside, are as they are in different social contexts, in France, for example. The question is it possible to make them possible in your context? And so at the beginning, I just understood the Belarusian countryside and the collectivist system as a controlled and an oppressive system. And it is a controlled and it is an oppressive system, but it is also something else, because within this system, with their circulation, reciprocities, the complexity I try to show, it is possible to attain merits, autonomy, equality. And in the urban context, I think that's there's foundations of justice, of fairness are the same. Merit, autonomy, equality. The question is, the system making it possible to reach these dimensions? Is it possible? Is the merit recognized possible in the urban situation in Belarus? Is autonomy possible in the urban context? Is equality possible? I think that's there were sometimes possible, sometimes not. And I think that last year, a lot of people say that it was not anymore possible to live as autonomous people, as people who are rewarded for their merit and so on. So there were this idea of dignity. The foundations finally are not very different. The question is how the concrete and local situations allows people to live as they want to live. And in the Belarusian countryside, it was not so easy to understand why, because we can think that there is propaganda, it's the control, it's the fear of the regime, but also it's not only that. Did I answer? So it's not just values who are integrated. Is the way you is the way you can represent yourself as being a person who lives in dignity.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is no real difference in urban and rural context. The problem is the urban context. Is it possible in the urban context to live like that?
Yeah, just one short comment. The same value, which is recognized by rural people and by people in the cities, can be understood a little bit differently by the people in the cities. So they want more, for instance. And there is one difference which I can observe. It's the acceptance of entrepreneurship in the post-Soviet villages and in the cities is totally different. So people in the, as Professor Anais said, and you said, that there are some values which can be, they are not produced probably by colchoses, as I thought before, so they're much deeper, but the way of their realization are viewed differently by people in the villages and by people in the cities. And now the people in the cities are the overwhelming majority of the Belarusians. It partially can explain this social and political explosion we had last year. So yeah, this is my comment. For the geography, it's a fragmented fieldwork. In fact, I wanted to meet people who could trust me. I didn't want to present myself, to introduce myself as totally stranger. So I had, I knew people in Minsk, who knew people in the countryside, who knew people in the countryside, and so on. So it was randomly. I had no real logic in my fieldwork, and it was the only way to meet people, and it was the only way not to be identified as a searcher by the authorities, because I was afraid they would not understand my methodology. I don't have any data. Sociology is just opinion data for them. So I was very careful on the fieldwork. So there were, it was around Minsk. It was also in the west, in the north, a little bit in the east. So it was fragmented. I have no logic. So the ethnic and religious aspects were not so salient for me. And for the gender dimension, it's not a real part of my book. It is, I think that we find it in different situations in the different chapters. There were no, in my observation, there were no real specificity in the moral evaluation of their world. There were different roles, different functions, according to your gender, according to your age. But what is fair and unfair, what is an honest man and a honest woman, in fact, I didn't found any salient difference. But I repeat, I'm very aware of that. I assume my ethnographic approach, I had limitation in the materials. I had not a lot of people I met, but I tried to make it, to make in-depth interviews and observation. But it's not a definite work, I think, and I hope that other researchers and perhaps young researchers could be inspired and go and try to understand better a lot of different dimensions.
I would have a question, maybe. I know it's very late, but if we have time for one short question, because I see no hands rise. It's a little bit banal question, but now it's there is a kind of turn in Polish historiography about writing a popular history of Poland. Maybe it's time for popular history of Belarus. But when you are speaking about Kolkhoz, there is a word that I was not hearing. It's the word corporatism. It is not only the popular culture, it is as well a specific sector organized on a corporate way, like in the Soviet system, and it has probably some consequences. So
cooperative system.
Yes, yeah. The cooperative, so Kolkhoz system is a corporation system, and the corporatism has probably some consequences on all these cultures, values, identities, networks, and so on. Maybe not.
About the popular history of Belarus, I don't know if it's linked, but I repeat what I said. I think that it's important to try to give the voice of different actors in social sciences and in social history. And the role of the countryside in the Belarusian studies, there is Anais Marin, but other Polish searchers, but they are not known, and that there is very, very few things. So yes, perhaps there is this sensibility. About corporatism, it is the way they identify themselves to the caucus. I didn't find this kind of identification really. There were good caucus, bad caucus, good chief, bad chief, good boss, bad boss. But there was no the idea that you participate to the history of an organization and that you are a part of that. It's not. It was not in this way of corporatism, as I understand it. So I try to be short.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there are no more questions. I don't know if there is any comment or question. I know the time is a little bit late. So I would propose, maybe, I see no argue. So I would propose maybe to finish here. I would finish by thanking very much all the participants, and particularly those who came from far. Ronan Hervouet, you are winning because you are coming from, I don't know if from
Bordeaux.
France or from Bordeaux or from Prague.
This time from Bordeaux.
Bordeaux, so, but as well our colleagues and friends from Poznan. I'm saluting all our colleagues from online. So I see some names from Krakow and some other parts of Poland. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for those who speak French and would like to continue the conversation, we have another debate with Ronan Hervouet tomorrow morning. Tomorrow at 11, yes?
Yes.
Late morning.
So thank you and goodbye.
Very much.